Welcome to week 8. I can't believe this term is going by so quickly. We just have a couple more weeks left before we take our finals. But this week we get to learn some new things that are really important to know how to do for the final. It's called merging documents. If you've taken a look at this homework yet, you know this is chapter 8. And in chapter 8, merging documents, we're going to be dealing with our mailings ribbon. We saw this ribbon a little bit last week, the week before, I guess, when we were doing envelopes and labels, just individual ones. But this week we're going to learn how we create not only envelopes and labels, but how we create directories and letters and labels and envelopes and email messages that can be sent out to hundreds and thousands of people all at one time. So this is super valuable because there's going to be times when you are working and you have a letter that you're going to send out to maybe 1,000 people. And you could make the same letter to everybody, but that's not very personable. So what you want to be able to do is make a letter personalized for those 1,000 people, but also make it quick so that you can quickly send those out and not have to type each one. So this week we're going to learn about this row here on our mailings ribbon, how we actually create something. And let me give you another example. This example is from a project that my daughter had done at school a while ago, like about 2 years ago. They were having a conference at their school, the Impact Conference, and they have students who need to sign up for all sorts of workshops during the day. And this is a list. There were multiple workshops for them to choose from, and every student chose 3 of them. So the problem was, how do we create a schedule for those students to know which workshop that they actually were able to get into, because there was a minimum number of students for each workshop. So taking this data, we had everybody's name and what they had signed up for, but now my daughter had to create a schedule for each student. So she was typing them one by one. They have 500 students. She has been working on this for a couple hours before I saw what she was doing. I'm like, what is happening? She was creating a schedule for each student that looked like this. Had their name and then what workshop they had chosen for each of those options. Now, it certainly works for her to type each one, but it would have been days of her time. And what we can do with merging a document is that she could take this file, which she had put all that information together on, and we would call this something called a data source file. And you can merge it with something called a main document, which is basically your Word document that you've created. So it's that schedule that you've created, but instead of typing their individual names here and what workshop they were in, we put something called a field. And this field tells the computer where to go in our data source file to pull information. So, for example, this field tells it to go to the name column. This field, Workshop 1, told it to go to the Workshop 1 column to pull information, and Workshop 2 and 3 and so forth. So what she could do is use this merging process to take this main document that she'd created with fields in it, merge it with this data source file, and ultimately within like 3 clicks get a file that had every single student on there with which ones they've chosen, and it's all in one file, and it had all 500 schedules for her to just print out and be done with it. Super valuable. Same thing is true for all those letters we talked about. You could do merge fields, and you can make a document to go out to hundreds of people within a couple clicks. So that's what we're going to be learning about today. So if you looked at the things that were in Chapter 8 already, it talks about we're going to learn how to create those data source files. We're going to learn how to create those main documents. We're going to learn how to preview and merge to make sure it's correct. and how to do envelopes and labels and directories. All those sorts of things you're going to learn in this chapter. But what I want to focus on today is making sure you understand the difference between everything, the main document, the data source files, and the merged document, and show you how we go about it. So, again, a data source file is basically just a series of records. It's just either an Excel worksheet, a table in Word, or an Access database that has rows of information that are all have to do with each other. So this one, these are a bunch of product descriptions, but this entire row, which is called a record, all has information that goes together. Just like when we were looking at this data source file with those students, each row, for instance, this has Tabitha's information. This entire row has to do with what she is selected. So a record has information that goes together. So a data source file is a series of records. Each row is called a record, and it is information that matches. The next thing I want to make sure you understand is the main document is whatever Word document you've created, whether it's a letter or in this case it was a table, where you're inputting something called merge fields into certain locations on that document to tell it where to pull information from our data source. This would be an example of some more fields, first name, last name, address, city, region, postal code, first name, that you could add to a letter. So those are the main things I want you to think about. Now, what I'm going to show you really quickly is how we go about doing that in our Word document. So in order to do this, I need to start with a data source file. And here's one. We saw one in Excel, what that looked like. Here's one, a simple one that is used in Word. This is a table. Again, it's a series of records. Each row has to do with each other. So this first record is for Jose, and the second one's for Aaron, and it has their address and city and state and zip. Each one of those pieces of information is in a separate column so that I can pull it separately. And that will make more sense when you go through the tutorials. So this is my data source file. Now, I also am going to start with something called a main document. And the main document, in my case right now, is going to be blank because I'm going to create it. But what I would want to do is I would want to make sure that if I had a letter already typed, that I could pull up simply something I already had and add something called merge fields to it to make it merge with my data source. So again, this might sound really confusing right now, but hang with me. So I'm going to type a letter, and I'm going to come down to my 2-inch top margin. I'm going to type the date. This is February 26th right now. I'm going to hit enter twice because I'm still in normal space template. And instead of entering someone's address, I'm going to enter a merge field. So do you see this? I'm going to send a letter to all these people, but instead of typing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 letters, I'm going to type 1, and it's going to go to all of them. So let me show you how that works. So I'm at the location where I want to put the person's name, but instead of typing their name, I'm going to put in a merge field. So how do I do that? On the mailings ribbon, we're always going to start left to right. We are never, never, never using these over here when we're merging. They don't work. We're going to always start with the Start Mail Merge drop-down, and we're doing a letter right now, so we're going to start with a letter. We're going to click on the letter. And then notice that all of this is grayed out, which means that you don't have access to it. That's because the computer says, hey, I can't merge anything until you tell me where your data source is. And so the next thing I have to do is come to select my data source record. Now, I could type a new list, and in your tutorials this week, you're going to learn how to do that. It creates an Access database, and that works just fine and dandy. But right now, for our purposes, I'm going to say that I'm going to use an existing list. And I'm going to use that list that you just saw. I had saved that to my desktop, and I'm thinking that I saved it contributors addresses, which is right here at the top. So I'm going to select it and say open. And now what you'll see is that you now have availability of all or most all of these tools up at the top for you. So I now have selected the recipients and now I want to enter that person's name. Well, I can go up here and look at my fields that I have availability to add. These fields will correspond directly to the column headers on my data source file. So whatever file I've uploaded or attached as my data source file, whatever the column headers are, those are the things that I have ability to insert. Those are the fields I have. So I can insert a first name, and I'm going to put a space, and I could insert the last name, and then I could do Control Enter again for my new line command, and then I'm going to put in their address, and then I'm going to do new line command, and then I'm going to do city, comma, space, state, space, zip code. So that is their address. Now, one thing you'll learn this week in your tutorials is that these are called individual fields. If I wanted to do something called a composite field and have the computer do that address for me, I could have selected address block. It's called a composite field again because it includes more than one field at once. And I could look down here and see which address I wanted to use, which format. And I do like this format where it has the title, and this is what it would look like. I can arrow through those on my list to see to make sure it's right. And I could say OK. And so instead of all of these fields, I would simply have something that said address block on there if I wanted to use that instead. Now, I can preview here really quickly to see what that's looking like. And one thing that I noticed is that if I preview that their address is double spaced, right? So that's a little bit of a problem. I'd want to make sure I checked that and I change that to single spaces, or as we know, I go back to click no space on my home ribbon. But I would want to make sure I looked at this either now or when I was done with the letter to make sure all the spacing was correct. So I'm going to unpreview. I know after my address I hit enter once, twice now because I'm in no space, and I'm going to say dear whomever, right? So again, in this case, I'm going to, instead of typing their name, which I could, right, because I have them here, I want it to be a field, so I can do it for everyone. So I could, again, merge these fields, so I could do title, and then I could put space, and I could put first name, space, last name, and if I previewed that, here's what my first one will look like, dear Mr. Jose Lopez. I also, if I wanted to use this greeting line instead of that, it actually combines all that for you. So either way is fine. It actually would have the dear Mr. Randall, or you can choose to have the first and last name, whatever you'd like. And if I inserted that, it looks like greeting line. But I'm going to do it the longer way right now by inserting each of those fields. I'm going to now hit enter twice, and now this is where I'm going to start my letter. Okay, so this is a test letter for the online class practice, right? And then I could type a whole bunch more, whatever I wanted to. But at this point in time, I'm not going to. I am simply going to end the letter. I'm going to hit enter twice. I'm going to say sincerely, 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to type in my name and all the things that I would normally do. So I have my main document with my fields inserted. I now can preview my results. This is what it would look like. And that's for my first result. If I wanted to come here and arrow through to see what all of them would look like, I could. But after I'm checking and making sure all my spacing's correctly and it's what I want it to be, I would click this button called Finish and Merge. When I click this, it says, hey, do you want to edit individual documents or do you want to print those documents? And I'm going to say, please never, never, never just print, because that goes right to your printer. You don't have a document to look at to edit anything. It just goes right to the printer. You could also do send email messages from here. But right now, I'm going to hit Edit Individual Documents. And it says, hey, do you want to do everybody in your record, in your data source file? Yep, I do. I'm going to leave it at all. If I didn't, I could say, hey, could you do from row 20 through, 60? But right now, we're going to do everybody because we have such a small data source file. So I'm going to say OK. Now, what happens? Notice I still have my main document back here. My main document's back there. But what happened is it opened up a brand new document, which this is called your merged document because it's one file. But as I go down, it has every single letter one after the next. And of course, these letters look weird because there's no text in there hardly. But it's one file with all of those letters. And as I look at this and I make sure it's what I want it to be, I could now just print this document, right? File print. And then when I did that, I would have all of these print out on my printer, and I could print them, throw them in some envelopes, and mail them out. But the important thing to know at this point is that you have two documents now. You have your main file, where you inserted your fields from your data source file, and then you have your merged document, which is actually the new document created that has all those letters one after another. So that is the basic of merging. One thing you'll want to make sure you do is that you save both of those files, your main document that has the fields in it and your merged document that has the actual results, because you'll need both of those files. The other thing I want you to notice is that this was a letter, but I certainly could do something else. I could do envelopes. If I did that, I want to select that first. It's going to take me to the same dialog box that I've always seen when I did envelopes a couple weeks ago. I choose the size, I choose the font, and then when I have it all set up, I then get a blank envelope where I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to put fields in here, and I'm going to put an address field. I would make sure that I had my data source file. I'm using existing one, and we already had one attached here, but I'm going to show you how to attach it again. I now can, again, put their first name, last name, or I could simply come over here and throw in an address block. Let's preview that. Oh, that looks really wacky, right? So we would want to fix that before we mailed that out. So I would go back and I would change my spacing to no space. And then now when I do my address block and I select it, oops, sorry, I didn't put it in the right place. Let's try that again. I want it over here. Now that when we put the address block in there and preview results, that looks so much better. Okay, and so now these are envelopes. Just like those letters, I previewed it. I can arrow through, make sure they're right. When I'm done, I'm going to unpreview and say merge and finish and merge, edit individual documents. I'm going to do all of them. And then now I have a brand new document that has each of those envelopes one after another. So that's what this chapter is about. It's about giving you a powerful tool that you will use for all sorts of things. As you go through the assignments and the tutorials, let me know if you have any questions. But the main idea is that you need to always start telling the computer what you're merging. Then you're going to select your list. And again, the list could be a table in Word that you've created with all your data, an Excel spreadsheet, or you could have an Access database. If I click this Type a New List, it creates a new list for you. So it allows you to go in and type the information You can customize the columns. You're going to learn all about that already in the tutorials. But when you save this, it's an Access database, which you may or may not have heard of before, but it is a database feature within Office. So you'll learn more about that in your reading. But make sure that when you're going through, you don't do this all at the last minute, that you really understand this chapter, because this is a big piece of the final. So let me know if I can help you in any way with that. That is most of this chapter, is just dealing with those merging documents. If you notice, the other things in here is you're going to learn how not only to merge, but you're going to learn how to create those data sources and how we edit those data sources. And that's something I'll review a little bit before our final to make sure you got that. You're also going to learn how to do input text during a mail merge. And this video is kind of so long already that I'm not going to add that as this part, but if you are struggling with this inputting text during a merge, make sure that you let me know. It basically is having you, during the merge, type in information, and you'll be doing that through this rules section. And in that rules section, let's see if I find that. I closed out my other document, but in that rules section, you have something called a fill-in field, and you'll be learning about that and working with that. Again, please make sure that makes sense, and if not, contact me. So thanks so much for listening. Sorry it was kind of long this week, but I hope you really enjoy this chapter, as it's super, 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 super valuable. You will love knowing how to merge documents, and you'll find lots of ways to use it in your life. If nothing else, you can send out a bunch of spam email. So have a great week, and we'll talk to you sometime later. Bye.